Moody's downgraded a number of G20 countries' economic growth forecasts, pegging US GDP at 1% in 2025 and 1.5% for 2026, and Chinese growth at 3.8% this year and then 3.9% for 2026, a far cry from the 5.4% growth it registered in the first quarter of this year. Looking at South Africa specifically, senior economist at Standard Bank, Elna Moolman, says Moody's expectation of 1.5% growth this year still looks on the higher side.
The new Moody's forecast for South African growth this year is still a little bit higher than ours. We downgraded our economic growth forecast earlier this year in response to both domestic and global developments. Unfortunately, global economic uncertainty is so high that in itself can have an even bigger impact on economic growth, both globally and domestically, than actual economic policy adjustments. We still expect there to be some recovery in South African economic growth in the medium term, premised on ongoing reforms to support economic growth.
Another economic observer also echoed that the 1.5% growth for South Africa sounded a bit too optimistic, expecting National Treasury to downwardly revise a number of key economic estimates at the forthcoming Budget 3.0, especially in light of the International Monetary Fund slashing its growth forecast for the country to 0.8% for the year.
Likely within the next third version of the budget to probably bring that down to around 1.5% is generally the number that comes through. National Treasury is always a little bit more on the optimistic side when they put the budgeting forecasts through. So it'll be a material downgrade, of course. Again, we expect that 1% is probably far more realistic outcome for this year. But as you pointed out, that has huge implications on revenue streams for South Africa, and that really is the crux of the issue at the moment, and why we're having these issues around multiple iterations of the budget. It boils down to the simple fact that South Africa is a growing economy. It is a growing population, a very strong youthful population as well. And as a result, we have high spending priorities and needs across the economy. But the sad, realistic side of things is that we are just not growing at the rate to sustain those spending needs. We've always maintained, or the typical economic rule of thumb, that South Africa only really sees material job creation when we have a growth rate of 3% or more in the economy.
The feeling is that the continued uncertainty, particularly around trade policy, will likely drag global economic growth down for the foreseeable future, while at the same time there are concerns that inflation may tick up due to supply constraints brought about by the trade tensions. Nompumelelo Ziba, SABC News, Johannesburg.